And we have Apple, as you know, it's coming in. And I had a little problem with Tim Cook yesterday. I said to him, Tim, you're my friend. I treated you very good. You're coming in with $500 billion, but now I hear you're building all over India. I don't want you building in India. You can build in India if you want to take care of India, because India is one of the highest tariff nations in the world. It's very hard to sell into India. And they've offered us a deal where basically they're willing to literally charge us no tariff. So we go from the highest tariff, you couldn't do business in India, we're not even a top 30 in India because the tariff is so high, to a point where they have actually told us, I assume you too, Scott, you were working on that also, that there will be no tariff, right? Would you say that's a difference? They're the highest, and now they're saying no tariff. But I said to Tim, Tim, look, we've treated you really good. We put up with all the plants that you built in China for years. Now you got to build us. We're not interested in you building in India. India can take care of themselves. They're doing very well. We want you to build here, and they're going to be upping their production in the United States. Apple. So Apple's already in for $500 billion, but they're going to be upping their production.
A warm welcome to this special conversation. The man who's giving us the biggest headlines these days is the US President, Donald Trump. From claiming to be the real sutradhar of a ceasefire between India and Pakistan, to going to Qatar and accepting a private plane as a gift from the very people and the very country which he had described at one point of time to be a great sympathizer of terror, Donald Trump now has raised his own ambition of making America great again, perhaps at the expense of making India weaker. With me, two of the foremost economic policy watchers with us, well-known friends of the Squirrel, Deepanshu, professor at the Jindal School, joining us live, and Mitali Nikore, another well-known economist. Great pleasure to be talking to both of you on a day like today. Let me straight away ask you, Mitali, first up. Respond to the statement which is made by Donald Trump, where he is at an open forum in the Middle East, going to the extent of saying, I have told Tim Cook, the Apple CEO, that he should not be producing in India. At a time when the Indian political establishment has been wearing this as a badge of honor, that Apple is now producing the biggest consignments of its products outside America in India. How does one read this statement being made by Donald Trump?
So I think, Bhupen, thanks a lot for having me on this discussion. And, I think there's always a lot to unpack when we're talking about President Trump, because, every day his mood is changing and every day his alliances are also in a way changing. And it's very interesting to see this. But I think one thing which is consistent, starting from the 2nd of April, when the tariffs were first, levied, till today, one thing which has been consistent is his attempt has been, let us onshore manufacturing into the US. At the end of the day, everything and every action that he's been taking has been focused on bringing back manufacturing somehow to the US. So when he says to Tim Cook, don't manufacture in India, I don't think that that's as much of a reflection on India per se, but to say that, we want you to actually manufacture in the US. So don't think of this China plus one strategy anymore. And it's not only, again, a message to Apple, but to pretty much any manufacturing enterprise saying, don't think about India, don't think about East Asia, don't think about other locations, don't think about Mexico, which is also emerging as a massive hub for, manufacturing and exporting to the US, but think of manufacturing in India.
Okay. Deepanshu Mohan, respond to this point. Mitali says, don't look at this as a negative against India. But there is the other part to what Donald Trump has been very aggressively championing, which is the zero tariffs, which he says India is offering to the US. Percy, do you believe it's possible, a zero tariff regime between India and America when it comes to trade? And then the point that don't make in India, because India would like Apple, India would want other American companies to come and invest in India.
Yeah, thank you, Bhupendra, for having me here. Well, there are two parts to this entire exercise, and I think this was coming. India has not taken an active, more assertive stance to respond to the United States in terms of its trade orientation and outlook. And I say that for two reasons. When the retaliatory tariffs were announced, this was principally a violation of WTO rules under the chief tenets of the main agreement that both the US and India are parties to. Now, since India did not publicly make any of those contestations clear, it immediately dropped down its tariffs, custom requirements, and the US, and particularly the signal that the Trump administration got, is that it's sort of a walkover when it comes to getting a trade negotiation work with India. The second evidence of this is what we have seen in the last 1 week of the national security situation, which was evolving. One needs to not isolate that with this particular conversation, because again, India's official response has not come out in any sense to what Trump has said or claimed, for that
But what can
matter.
India
Now,
say? But
no,
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 no.
no. But what can India
Hear
really
me out.
say? That's
Hear me
the
out.
fundamental point. Sure.
Hear me out. So the third instance is now that since India and US are locked right now in a trade negotiation for its FTA, which is a work in progress, it's a clear signal again by Trump, which is, and you have to understand, he manages media perception battles better than perhaps most leaders. It's a perception battle which India needs to have an assertive strategy response to. What I'm saying is, on economic front, tangibly you don't see a Tim Cook or an Apple reorienting its manufacturing investment in India. It takes years of planning to have manufacturing operations planned in a country. So in fact, by the time Trump finishes his second term, even then you will not see any larger radical structural changes. But what this does is it puts a signaling effect on other American investors which were pivoting towards China, towards India, that they are somewhere implicitly seeing India in the same light as to that of China, which is
No, Deepanshu, here's my counter to that. On the third point that you're making. See, if your argument is that Trump is only signaling to the other American businesses which may be thinking in terms of setting up their businesses in India, Tim Cook, the Apple story in India, has been worn as a huge badge of honor by the Indian establishment. Right? I mean, I was just looking at a report which has been shared by the Prime Minister's office itself. In the month of March, there has been a 25% increase in shipment of Apple products from India to the US. I mean, that's the volume of growth that you're talking about. Now, when Trump takes his position, do you expect Tim Cook to follow, or do you believe that this is just a political statement?
No, there's a lot Tim Cook cannot follow in the immediate context. But what you have to understand is that the point that Mitali made, that US and Trump are focused on manufacturing and having that manufacturing to take place in the US, that narrative will not go out. But it is the fundamental weakness of India's manufacturing landscape that a badge of honor is instilled from one major investment coming from the US, vis-a-vis the amount of 10 years of investment we have made through subsidizing PLI, Make in India plans, are competitive in levels. If you look at value addition in manufacturing to GDP, the data on it is out there. It's not at all in any way drastically gone up. And what it's happened is it's put a lot of pressure on the Indian government in that sense to draw investment from outside, which is the foreign direct investment we have been looking. We haven't got enough FDI as well. A lot of our foreign direct investment is in services and other areas. Manufacturing doesn't get that kind of capital. The only state that has done very well in that regard is Tamil Nadu. Tamil Nadu is where, in fact, most of the investment is going. And we have now a semiconductor announcement with Foxconn in the state of Uttar Pradesh. But what you have to understand is manufacturing capital investment in India from the US is not likely to grow unless and until there is a conservative wave in American politics, which will keep echoing that manufacturing capital investment has to come back to the US, and that you invest in the US and then you export to India, which is what I think Trump wants to do. In the immediate context, I don't see much of a huge difference in reorientation, but it's a big signaling effect for American investment in India that you need to make or redivert that route. Right now, what we are speaking and we are discussing, I think it's a lot within the battle of perception. Trump is not someone you cannot negotiate in a matter of few hours, where if you were to talk to him and say that, oh, we are planning a major investment in the US, let's say an Indian company doing that, so he can quickly flip. See, the US-China trade reorientation, you see, the biggest example is of that. There was no plan for the US to renegotiate a trade deal with China up until the retaliatory tariffs were announced. It was after the retaliatory tariffs were announced, 1 week passed by, China got into its own response mode, and then you have suddenly now a recalibrated new trade deal between the US and Chinese, right, which is being spoken of. It's the exact same playbook he followed in the first administration. Who gained out of that exercise? Between you and me, it was not China or US who gained out from that trade reorientation, but Vietnam. Vietnam started exporting maximum amount of its products, which China was selling to Vietnam, and then Vietnam. So trade diverts and deflects. It doesn't reimagine itself on its own. Businesses take a lot of time in planning investment. So this is not a hot capital flight out where you can see investment going from one on to other on an announcement.
Slightly different question. While I broadly agree with the contours of your argument, Deepanshu, but Mitali, let's go back on the drawing board. If I was to put up, let's say, all these instances, all these events which are unfolding all around us, bang in the middle of a full-blown conflict between India and Pakistan, there is this trade deal which gets signed between America and China that the Deepanshu is speaking about, right? As the ceasefire ends, the first person who wants to take credit is Donald Trump himself for the ceasefire. What's the first statement he makes thereafter? I'm telling both India and Pakistan, come, let's do trade, let's do business. And where does he go and announce his biggest trade deal? In Qatar, where India has a good relationship with the Saudi Crown Prince. We've seen the kind of bonhomie which is going to display between the Indian Prime Minister and the Saudi authorities. But when it comes to trade, when it comes to business, is Donald Trump trying to reassert himself in a completely new avatar now in these parts of the world?
So I think, Bhupen, I just want to respond to a couple of things that Deepanshu also said, and then, come to this entire point. It ties in very well together. The first is, I think at this point in time, as we're analyzing this role that Trump is playing, he's playing the role of what we call a trade disruptor, right? He began this entire narrative by, first of all, resetting the entire rules of the game by putting in tariffs that nobody could have imagined, right? First, he comes in and he says, I'm going to put 50% tariffs on a country like Lesotho, right? The entire set of value chains around the world gets reset overnight in a way that is a complete shock to the system. Then after 2 or 3 days, he goes back and he says, you know what, actually, I'm not going to put such high tariffs. I'm going to pause the tariffs on the rest of the world. But it's only this one country that I have a massive trade deficit with. I wanted to target them. And look, I could have done that, but I'm so good. I am so nice. I'm going to cut down the tariffs to just 10% for 90 days. And I'm giving everybody an opportunity to access the US market tariff-free. Come and talk to me, impress me, make me happy. So this kind of, conduct, when you do it as a president and when you do it controlling, and having the control to the world's largest consumer market, right? That is his leverage, right? At the end of the day, what kind of motion does that set into for the state of the world's economy? And that's why you have a Goldman Sachs and you have other, international investors coming and saying the recession risks at a global level are so high because this kind of uncertainty is something that the rest of the world and the banking systems and the financial systems can't take, right? Now, when you juxtapose that to a geopolitical, level within India, Pakistan, South Asia, and he's renegotiating all of these supply chains to benefit the US, to benefit the Trump administration, to benefit his own companies, right? In many ways. This is where the entire narrative is at. That how do you actually benefit the Trump set of enterprises more than any other, set of enterprises? This is what he's negotiating. Now,
so let me ask both of you. Let me ask both of you this. Yeah, okay. Complete your point. Sure.
I'll just complete one point, which is that
Sure.
in all of this, what should India be focusing on? What should India be doing? How do you navigate so much uncertainty when you don't know what the person is going to say the next day? You focus on making your economy stronger. And of course, I'll come back to expanding on that on how.
Yeah, so the question that I'm raising, just like Deepanshu is saying, that it's not as if there's going to be an overnight flight of capital out of India. Let's say the fault lines which have existed in the Indian economic scenario, it's not as if those fault lines are going to disappear overnight. So my point is that if Donald Trump is publicly, repeatedly saying that India is offering me almost a zero tariff regime and it will be a zero tariff regime on both sides, firstly, is it possible to have a zero tariff regime on both sides, Mitali?
So, Bhupen, I don't think that it's possible to have a zero tariff regime on both sides, particularly given the agriculture sector, right? Even if you brought in a zero tariff regime for, say, manufacturing and certain sectors in manufacturing, it is impossible for us to open up the agriculture sector and say, come here and dump all your corn oil, right? It's not possible because we have to protect our farmers. The way our agriculture sector is structured, we don't have corporate farming in India, right? So we have to protect the farm sector. We have to protect our MSMEs. And we are a developing economy. Our per capita income is $2,500 per person, right, per annum. And the US is $90,000 per person per annum. So how can you actually have a zero tariff regime when you're trading with a developing country? It's not possible.
Deepanshu?
Well, I mean, the Minister of External Affairs has made a statement as we were speaking, which is on any trade deal has to be mutually beneficial. It has to work for both countries, and that would be our expectation from any trade deal. And until that is done, I quote, any judgment will be premature. So India is, I think, in that context, on trade, what India needs is a US minor strategy to engage more deeply within South Asia, to engage more deeply in Southeast Asia, to engage more deeply in different parts of West Asia, which is where a lot of our trade is currently in what I would consider are very much basic commodity goods, but needs to trade diversification of that basket needs to happen. And also in remote areas in services like Latin America, where of course physical mobility of good transfers may not happen, but for services and a lot of other, there's enormous potential. So I think India has to, while needs to negotiate carefully on an FTA with the US, it may take a few months, and that's a big conversation to be had, which is what's the nature of that India-US trade dynamic needs to look like. I would say that more than agriculture, there are also sectors which are deeply vulnerable within the labor-intensive aspect of capital investment, which makes the job situation in India particularly more vulnerable with the investment of AI and technology enabling disruptors. So the US, I think, in that regard, would need to be dealt with in as what would be meant as any other trade partner, like we have done with the UK, where we have done a very good, I would say, trade deal in terms of the context of the times we are living in. Of course, years back, a trade deal like that may have not garnered much of attention, but I think in this current context, it's a very well negotiated FTA. India would do well to have a similar negotiated process with the US completing. The announcement of zero tariffs, Bhupendra, is very important of why he's doing that in the Middle East or West Asia, which is this is also Trump's first major visit outside the United States in his second term. You must be aware. He has tried to leverage US military strength to get a lot more of trade-related investments going. And that hasn't worked so far very well for the US economy. It has taken a lot of capital out. It is spiraling into a recession. It has panicked a lot of the markets which were otherwise doing very well in his first administration. So he's under a lot of pressure right now. And that would my sense is that he would make more of such announcements, expecting other countries, not just India, but China and other countries to comply based on the simple announcement. So while we may ignore to a certain extent, we should not assertively deny or in any way comply with what the US president is saying, because in the battle of perception, where a lot of the investment in the future lies, the functioning of stock markets is about hope and how things will go in the future.
Well,
India
I like your phraseology. I like your phraseology when you say don't deny but do not comply as well. But on that, don't deny, do not comply. But Mitali, then my final question to you: if that's a preamble, do not deny but do not comply as well, which means be very, very cautious. What do you think is really on the table for the Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal as he now goes in for trade talks now in this kind of a geopolitical scenario? What's the strategy you think that someone like a Piyush Goyal should have?
So firstly, Bhupen, I actually don't think that we should have an aggressive strategy. I think, Deepanshu, on this, I'll disagree with you a little bit. I don't think that our strategy can be very aggressive when it comes to a lot of the Western countries, because if we look at our current bargaining position and if we look at the other countries that we trade with, I mean, when I look at the cross-border trade, for example, between India and the rest of the South Asian neighbors, it's minuscule of what it should be because there are high trade barriers. And the only country within South Asia that we used to have a good trading relationship simply doesn't want to speak to us anymore, right? And other South Asian countries, for example, Sri Lanka or Nepal, don't have that kind of economic might that we could trade with them. So I think the options in our neighborhood are limited. Yeah, but now it's not happening. No, I mean, you and I both have been going to Dhaka. We know what the situation is. So that's not happening and that's not growing. That's not an area where we can see massive growth. Definitely, right. I agree with the Central Asia, suggestion. It does make sense, and West Asia also. But even there, the economic might of these countries as consumers is not that high. Southeast Asia, fantastic. Let's have more trade with them. We'd love to. But those are markets that are very closely bound to China in any case. So the West is a very important trading partner for India. The UK FTA is definitely very promising, but is getting heavily criticized in the UK. And therefore, we have to always be careful that even the perception of the US-India FTA within the US consumers and markets and amongst their MAGA base also has to be positively managed. Therefore, there's a lot of back-end negotiations and back-end discussions that have to be had, and a lot of media management that has to be done even from the India side, because at the end of the day, when we look at it, it is extremely critical to manage those perceptions. Also, very critical to manage those perceptions because India is not only interested in having a merchandise trade deal with the US, but also services. It is very critical for our IT industry, where we are already seeing falling revenues and where we are already seeing AI replacement of Indian IT services, AI-based companies coming in. We have to start offering those AI service offerings in order to, make up that revenue and not lose out on the global IT race. So it is very important that we look at this entire relationship with the US in a broader light. It's not only about an Apple or about manufacturing sector per se, but about a wider range of sectors, new sectors that are coming in, AI-based, technology transfer, renewable energy transfer, semiconductors, and electronics. So, we have to really have that broad base.
Well, as I thank both of you for joining us on this special edition, I can only say one thing. The Trump show is one of the greatest shows to follow around. And I think something tells me that we're just at the beginning end of this great Trump show. What will the morrow bring for us? We'll wait and see. But thank you to both of you for joining us on this special program.
Thank you.